Okay, calm down. I know I'm pushing the definition of a sequel here, but the series isn't called Reboot Watch, New Release Watch, or 300th edition of the Marvel franchise game Watch. It's called Sequel Watch. And I'm making this video because I want to talk about the new Spider-Man game. Though not a sequel per se, there have been more than enough iterations of Spidey that we have plenty to look at. For example, there's my personal first, Neversoft Spider-Man. Then there's Treyarch's excellent Spider-Man 2. Then there's some utterly dreary offerings to tie into the amazing Spider-Man movies. Let's not forget Spider-Man 3, which... Actually, maybe it's best we do forget that one. That's not even scratching the surface of all their releases, and to describe the series' fortune as mixed would be putting it lightly. This time around, however, Insomniac are stepping up to the plate, and they've got a serious pedigree. Along with Sony, they have developed the Spyro, Resistance and Ratchet & Clank series, all to critical acclaim, as well as Sunset Overdrive for the Xbox One, which itself received wide praise. So after their brief Microsoft affair, Insomniac are back with PlayStation, and they're looking to try their hand at the Spider-Man series, and it looks like their long-term collaborators are putting some serious backing into this release. Early gameplay footage, however, flattered to deceive. It looked fluid and visually impressive, but it seemed littered with the same QTEs which in the past has really sank Spider-Man games. Looking at you again, Spider-Man 3.
Help! Please! Someone! I'm going to die!
Since then, however, we've seen more of the game. And though the QuickTime events were still present, it appears that they fit nicely into the combat and action, rather than being forced and momentum breaking. On the subject of combat, it appears to follow the counter-combo mechanics of, say it with me now, Arkham Asylum. Don't get me wrong, the Arkham games are amongst my favourites due in no small part to the combat engine. Since its release though, it has become almost universal, popping up in some form for Shadow of Mordor, Mad Max, and by now it's starting to feel a little overdone. The aforementioned amazing Spider-Man game straight up lifted the Arkham mechanics, and in doing so felt a lesser sequel of a pellet swap. Instead of utilising the strengths of Spider-Man's arsenal and fitting that around a similar mechanic, the developers took the mechanics and tried to force a moveset into it. Back onto Spider-Man 2018, and there does seem to be more of an effort to make the combat feel unique, with web-slinging finishers and a more speedy, free-flow feel as opposed to the weighty brutality of Batman. But I suppose we can only be sure when we get our hands on it. On the subject of Arkham, however, and Insomniac didn't quite put down the rock-steady cheat sheet when it came to the plot. In case you haven't seen it, let me fill you in. Spider-Man comes to a breakout in a high-security prison, featuring his greatest enemies of adventures past. When things go awry, it turns out that this was all part of a grand plan to get back at the superhero. Sound familiar? The big issue for me here is, while Batman's rogues gallery boasts the most famous characters in the comic book medium, Spider-Man's villains are a bit... Look, the Sinister Six is entertaining, but forgive me for not feeling too excited by the prospect of throwing down with the Vulture and Mr. Negative. On the plus side though, there is the opportunity for some interesting boss fights here, with a flying boss, a tank boss, projectile bosses, allowing for some decent variety. As a matter of fact, Arkham Asylum's greatest flaw was its unimaginative use of boss fights, with the obvious exception of the Scarecrow encounters. So if Insomniac were to up the ante with their villains, there could be some serious promise here. Let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of the previous games, and what Insomniac should probably look to avoid. We've already covered QTEs, but the biggest make or break factor in Peter Parker's gaming foray is the web slinging. Probably the best example of this done right, in my opinion, came with Spider-Man 2. Hours would be joyously whiled away swinging between New York open world and exploring a well-realised city. The mechanic utilised momentum and timing, and as such, the somewhat mundane task of travel became the most rewarding and enjoyable part of the experience. Games since have somehow missed that memo, giving auto-swing options, or swinging that has no connection to the actual environment, crippling the very fact that gives the franchise its edge. That's something that has experienced mixed fortunes, so let me focus on something that really grates me personally with modern Spider-Man games. And funnily enough, it's Spider-Man himself. I know a lot of people love the Joss Whedon-esque smarmy quips, but they quickly wear thin on me. It's not too bad during a 90-minute film, but for a video game, you're expected to sit there and listen to these seriously painful jokes for a solid 20 hours. and it's kind of hard to root for protagonists when what you really want to see is them forcefully silenced by a rhino horns that face. But I digress. The reason why this to me is such a big factor ties loosely into why the web slinging is so important. You want to be immersed in a game like this, and nothing takes you out of the moment more than a series of tortured puns that will have repeated themselves 5 times a piece over a full gaming session. You want to feel like you're playing as Spider-Man, not as a fly on the wall listening to his ill-advised open mic set. Insomniac look like they're picking up and running with Peter Parker's puns, and that really concerns me. At this point you could point to the funny and light-hearted tone set by Insomniac with the original Spyro and Ratchet & Clank games. While that's fair, more recently they've wrote dialogue for Sunset Overdrive and the Ratchet & Clank reboot, which just came off as forced and cringe-inducing.
I used to dream of being arrested by you!
Now get out of here. I was talking to you, Zed.
Yes, Captain.
I'm not demanding yet another dour and brooding protagonist, but I'd rather my character be dull rather than downright irritating. When done well, a funny and endearing protagonist can be truly memorable. But overcook it, and before long you'll have made Sonic the Spider Hog.
That's no good.
So there's another fanbase I've totally alienated. It may sound like I'm being critical of Insomniac's most recent work, but humour notwithstanding, both titles were really strong, and their early work shows that they can clearly create lovable protagonists, at least in a very Saturday morning cartoon way. Also, I believe that Sunset Overdrive's greatest strength may bode well for the up-and-coming release. The map itself was designed from the ground up to make the very act of traversing the scenery fun, with running, grinding and jumping linking seamlessly. Combine that level design with Spider-Man's web-slinging abilities, and we may finally be onto a winner in that regard. Despite my earlier cynicism, I'm very excited about this release. Insomniac have an excellent track record, and this generation, Sony have seriously put their money where their mouth is when it comes to exclusives. The developers have been provided a long list of previous games to demonstrate what not to do when it comes to the friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man, so should be able to learn from prior mistakes. This is tipped by many to be a Game of the Year contender, and if early footage is anything to go off, they may well be right. Hi everyone, did you enjoy the video? Thanks for getting all the way to this totally not pre-recorded message. I'd love it if you could like and comment and subscribe, you have no idea how all of that helps me out. Hope to see you in the next one. Thanks as always.